He kissed me goodbye this morning, but he died last night. That's how my story begins. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 74 years old, and what I'm about to tell you still makes the hair on my arms stand up every time I think of it. Before I begin, if you believe that love can reach across time, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me keep sharing my stories with you all. When I woke up that morning, the world felt strangely quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Light was slipping gently through the curtains, pale and cold, like it had forgotten how to be warm. I reached over to the other side of the bed, expecting the usual sound of his slow, steady breathing, but the space beside me was empty. Then, just as I was about to sit up, I heard his voice. "Morning, Evelyn," he said softly, the way he always did, with that half smile that made even the dullest days feel worth living. He kissed me on the forehead. The scent of his cologne, cedar, and something faintly sweet, wrapping around me like a memory I didn't yet know I'd lose. He looked perfectly alive, his eyes clear, his touch warm. He even joked that the coffee would probably taste like I'd forgotten the sugar again. Then he grabbed his coat, winked, and said, "See you tonight, love." It was so ordinary. That was what made it extraordinary later. Half an hour passed. I poured my coffee, checked the morning paper, and smiled at the thought of him stopping by the florist like he sometimes did when he wanted to surprise me. Then the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Carter," a man's voice said. "I'm calling from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm so sorry, ma'am. Your husband passed away last night at 11:40 p.m. I remember the cup slipping from my hand. The sound of it shattering was too loud, like the world had cracked open with it. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to say, that's impossible. My husband had been here. He'd kissed me, spoken to me, smiled. I could still feel the warmth of his lips on my skin. But all I said was, there must be some mistake. The man repeated the details, his name, his medical record, the time of death. Each word built a wall I couldn't climb. I hung up and just sat there, the smell of spilled coffee mixing with the faint scent of his aftershave. The clock ticked towards 7. I stared at it until the minute hand trembled. I looked at the door he had walked out of less than an hour ago. His coat was gone. The hallway light was still on, like it had been when he left. If he died at 11:40 p.m., who had kissed me goodbye at 6:12 a.m.? I wanted to believe my mind had broken under grief, that maybe I dreamed it all. But then I noticed the smallest proof that it had really happened. 2 coffee cups on the counter. One was mine, half empty. The other, his, untouched but still warm. I called the hospital again, demanding they check their records. They confirmed everything. Heart failure, admitted late last night, pronounced dead before midnight. There was no doubt, no confusion on their side. The nurse even said she had called me earlier, but my phone had gone unanswered. I hung up again and stared at my hands. They were trembling. I kept rubbing my thumb against the faint trace of lipstick on my wrist, the mark he left when he brushed a kiss across my skin before leaving. Maybe the mind invents things to protect itself. Maybe grief folds time into strange shapes so that what we lose doesn't vanish all at once. But something deep inside me whispered that it wasn't just imagination. That morning, someone, had come back to say goodbye. When I checked my phone later that day, there was a new voicemail, time stamped 6:04 a.m., just 8 minutes before he kissed me. And that, dear friends, was when I realized the story was only beginning. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at that voicemail notification on my phone. The small red circle pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, alive, mocking the words the hospital had spoken. I pressed play with shaking hands, half afraid of what I might hear, half terrified that I'd hear nothing at all. His voice filled the room, calm, certain, full of the familiar warmth that always made me feel safe. "Good morning, love," he said. "The dawn's beautiful today. I'll be waiting by the lake, the bench near the old willow, when the sun's gentle, like you like it." Then a soft chuckle, followed by the faint rustle of wind. That was all. The message lasted 12 seconds. But it felt like time stopped inside those 12 seconds. I replayed it again and again, until the sound of his breath became the rhythm of my own. Every detail was wrong and right at the same time. He sounded alive, not like a recording from the past. There was no strain, no weakness, no sign of the heart that had supposedly stopped beating hours earlier. The hospital had told me he died at 11:40 p.m. The voicemail was sent at 6:04 a.m., the same morning he'd kissed me goodbye. My phone confirmed it. The timestamp was clear, no edits, no signs of a scheduled message. Even the metadata in the file showed the exact moment it had been recorded. Today, before sunrise. I wanted to dismiss it as a glitch. Phones fail. Apps mislabel times. Networks delay transmissions. There's always an explanation, isn't there? But something deep inside me resisted the logic. My husband was meticulous. He never liked technology, but when he did use it, it was intentional, precise, measured. I got up and went to the kitchen, retracing his every step. His cup still sat on the counter, the one he hadn't touched. The faint outline of his shoes marked the kitchen rug, facing the door, just as he'd stood that morning. A single chair was pulled slightly away from the table. He had sat there, briefly. I knew his habits. He always paused for a minute before leaving, staring out the window, whispering something to himself like a morning prayer. I glanced at the clock. 6:12 a.m. That was when he'd kissed me. My phone said the voicemail had been sent 8 minutes earlier. Had he recorded it and then come home to say goodbye? Or had something else happened? I scrolled through my call history, through old messages, desperate for a mistake that would make it all make sense. Instead, I found something stranger. The voicemail had been saved automatically to my phone's internal storage, not through the carrier's network, as if it had been placed directly onto my device. For a second, I thought of calling the police. But what would I say? My dead husband called me this morning? They'd write me off as a grieving widow losing her mind. So I did the only thing that made sense. I started collecting evidence. First, I checked the hallway camera. We'd installed it last year, mostly because of raccoons that kept knocking over the trash bins. I'd never used the footage before, but when I opened the app, a single clip appeared, motion detected at 6:11 a.m. My heart pounded. The camera had recorded something. The image was dark, grainy, tinted blue from the low light. But it was him, standing by the door. Same coat, same careful movement as he leaned down to tie his shoes. The date and time blinked in the corner, unmistakable. 6:11 a.m., October 12th. I watched the clip over and over. At one point, he looked toward the camera, almost knowingly, as if he understood that one day I'd need proof. He didn't smile. He just looked calm, peaceful. Then he turned, opened the door, and stepped into the dawn. I froze the frame on his face. There was no fear there, no pain, no confusion, only intention. As if he was walking toward something he understood and I didn't. Maybe he knew. Maybe he felt his body failing and refused to let death be the final word. Maybe this was his way of keeping a promise that he'd never leave without saying goodbye. I opened the voicemail once more, listening for something I might have missed. In the background, beneath his voice, I could hear faint water sounds, ripples, birds. A distant church bell. He'd mentioned the bench by the lake, the one near the old willow where we used to sit every Sunday after church. I grabbed my keys. I didn't care that it was nearly noon now. I needed to go there. As I stepped outside, the air felt heavy, charged, as if the world knew something I didn't. The wind moved the trees gently, and for a split second, I thought I smelled his cologne again, faint and fading, like the echo of a dream. If the dead could leave messages, if love could defy the ticking of a clock, then maybe what I felt wasn't madness at all. Maybe it was the beginning of understanding. And as I drove toward the lake, I kept repeating the same question to myself. Like a prayer I couldn't stop whispering. How can someone say goodbye after they're already gone? The drive to the lake felt endless. The closer I got, the heavier the air became, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for me to arrive. The sky was pale, washed out, the kind of gray that hides the line between night and morning. I parked near the path we used to walk every Sunday, where the willow branches dipped low over the water like they were whispering secrets to the earth. I sat in the car for a long time before stepping out. My heart was pounding, not from fear exactly, but from the feeling that reality was shifting around me, bending in slow motion. I pressed play on the voicemail again, his voice spilling from the speakers, soft and calm, layered with the sound of rippling water and distant wind. There was something about the tone that I hadn't noticed before. The way he said when the sun's gentle, like you like it, carried a subtle tremor, almost like he knew it would be the last time. He wasn't just saying goodbye, he was recording it. I played it over and over, each time isolating a new sound. The creak of the wooden bench, the hum of insects. Then, something faint, almost inaudible beneath it all, a rhythmic beep. I turned the volume up until it hurt. It was soft, but distinct. A medical monitor, a hospital pulse. The realization sent a chill through me. If he recorded the message near the lake, why would there be the sound of a heart monitor in the background? Unless the audio wasn't recorded there. I opened my phone's audio info again. The metadata confirmed it. Recorded at 6:04 a.m., but there was also a location tag, the hospital's coordinates. He never left. He was still there when he said those words. I sat frozen, trying to understand what that meant. The hospital had pronounced him dead at 11:40 p.m. The machines had been turned off, but the recording proved otherwise. He was awake, conscious, hours later. Long enough to leave me one last message. The nurse must have been mistaken. Or maybe she wasn't. Maybe he wasn't supposed to wake up. Maybe he did. For just a few minutes. Long enough to find his phone, press record, and say goodbye. The logical part of my mind clung to that version. But another part, deeper and older, whispered something else. Some things are not meant to be explained. I got out of the car and followed the familiar path toward the bench. The grass was still damp, the air thick with the smell of lake water and fallen leaves. When I reached the bench, I stopped short. Someone had been there recently. There were faint footprints in the mud, men's shoes, size and pattern exactly like his. And on the bench itself, under the armrest, something small glimmered in the light. It was a tiny brass key attached to a worn blue ribbon. My name was written on a tag in his handwriting. For Evelyn. I felt my knees weaken. He had planned this. Whatever was happening, it wasn't random. He had left me something, a trail, a reason, maybe a truth. I sat down slowly, holding the key between my fingers. The brass was still warm, impossibly warm, as if it had been held moments ago. I looked out at the lake, perfectly still, except for one small ripple spreading across the surface, like someone had just thrown a stone. Then my phone buzzed again. A new notification. One file added to your voice memos. My blood ran cold. I hadn't touched the phone. My fingers were still wrapped around the key. I opened the app. A new audio clip. No title. Time stamped 6:27 a.m. More than 20 minutes after the first voicemail. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I pressed play. Static at first, faint and crackling, like a weak radio signal. Then his voice again, softer now, slower, distant, as if coming from far away. Evelyn, if you're hearing this, I kept my promise. Don't be afraid of what doesn't make sense. Go to where the sun first met the water. There's something waiting for you. The clip ended with that same faint beep, the heart monitor, and then silence. I sat there on that bench, surrounded by the sound of wind and water, clutching a brass key that shouldn't exist, listening to a man who shouldn't be alive. And yet, somehow, I wasn't afraid, because for the first time since his death, I felt something stronger than grief, the feeling that I wasn't done loving him yet. I slipped the key into my pocket, wiped my tears, and looked toward the far side of the lake where the first sunlight touched the water. That's where I needed to go next. When I drove back home from the lake, I kept the little brass key in my palm the entire time, as if letting go of it would break whatever invisible thread still connected us. Every curve of that drive felt different now, like the world had subtly rearranged itself, waiting for me to notice. Even the street where we had lived for 48 years seemed quieter, holding its breath the way it does before a storm. I placed the key on the kitchen table, right next to his untouched coffee cup. The contrast between the two objects, one frozen in the past, one newly arrived from somewhere impossible, made my hands tremble. I'd always known our home was full of echoes, but that afternoon, it felt alive. The air was heavier, thick with something that wasn't quite grief, wasn't quite presence, something in between. The brass key was old, worn smooth by years of touch. It didn't look like anything from our house, not from the doors, not from the garage, not from the attic. I tried it on the front door anyway. It didn't fit. The basement lock, no. The garden shed, still no. Every failed attempt made my heart race faster, because that meant there was something I didn't know about. Some lock he'd kept hidden. When you live with someone for a lifetime, you think you know every secret they could possibly have. But sometimes, love is just the polite name we give to what we choose not to see. I stood in the hallway, staring at the wall of photographs. All those decades of smiles. Christmas dinners, anniversaries, each one now feeling like it had been staged by ghosts. And then I noticed something strange. One of the frames, a small black one with a photo of us by the fireplace, hung slightly crooked. It always had. But this time, I heard something faint behind it. A soft metallic click, like a tiny latch. My breath caught. I lifted the frame off the wall and found a small panel behind it, almost invisible, carved into the wood decades ago. I pressed gently, and it popped open. Inside was an old wooden box with a brass lock, the exact same color as the key. My hands shook as I slid the key in. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting for me. Inside were letters, dozens of them, neatly stacked and tied with twine. Each one addressed to me. Each one dated after the day he died. The first envelope was marked with trembling handwriting. "Read this only when you see the morning I promised." I sat down slowly, the room spinning around me. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible. The envelopes were dusty, but the ink was fresh, too fresh. The air around me shifted, warm for a moment, almost like someone had opened the door to another season. I tore the first envelope open. "My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then you've seen me. I told you once that love is the only thing that doesn't understand time. I felt it, you know, the line between now and forever bending. I was afraid, but I found peace knowing I could still reach you. Don't let them tell you you're imagining it. The heart knows before the mind accepts. There's one more thing you must find. Go to the place where I first asked you to dance. What's hidden there belongs to both of us." I pressed the paper to my chest, trying to steady my breath. He had written about seeing me, about still reaching me. How could that be? Had he written these before his death, expecting I'd somehow see him again? Or was something else guiding his words? As I sat there, the lights in the hallway flickered once and twice, then steadied again. I could smell his cologne faintly, drifting from the living room. That same cedar scent that had wrapped around me the morning he kissed me goodbye. I followed it slowly, my footsteps soundless on the floorboards. The house creaked like it was remembering. Every corner, every picture, every shadow seemed to hum with a quiet familiarity, as if the walls themselves had memorized his voice and were whispering it back to me. When I reached the living room, I froze. On the armchair by the fireplace, where he used to sit every night with his book and his glasses half slipping down his nose, there was a single white feather. Perfect, untouched. It shouldn't have been there. We had no birds, no open windows. And yet, it was resting exactly where his head would have been. I picked it up. It was warm and soft, and for the first time since he died, I said his name out loud, not as a memory, but as if he were standing right in front of me. "Robert." The air moved, just slightly, a gentle exhale that brushed the back of my neck, and in that stillness, I finally understood. This wasn't just a house. It was a vessel. It remembered. I didn't leave right away. I sat with the letter for a long time, tracing the ink where his hand had pressed harder on certain words, as if he had wanted them to linger. "Reach you, morning, belongs to both of us." The house was quiet, but not empty, never again empty. When I finally stood, the brass key in my pocket felt heavier, as if it were carrying the weight of a promise. The place where I first asked you to dance. The memory rose whole, like a photograph someone warms between their hands. Not the church basement where they held winter socials, not the country club where people danced to impress one another, but the Willow Lane Pavilion, a wooden hall just off the lake path, open on summer nights, fairy lights strung like small moons along the rafters. We were young then. Robert had worn a shirt that looked too new for him, and his tie was crooked in a way I found endearing. The band had been terrible and earnest. He'd cleared his throat, offered his hand, and said, "If I step on your toes, we can both pretend it's part of the song." I drove there in the late afternoon. The road was lined with maple trees crying out their last red leaves, and the air carried the sharp, sweet smell of smoke from a distant chimney. The pavilion was still there, a little more tired at the edges, but steady the way places that hold love tend to be. Someone had locked the front doors with a simple brass hasp. My heart knocked once against my ribs. Brass again. I touched the ribbon at the end of the key in my pocket, the same soft blue as the wax on the envelope in the hidden box, and tried the lock. It turned like it had been waiting for me. Inside, Dust gathered in the corners the way old music gathers in the corners of memory. The light through the high windows fell in long, patient beams, and the scuffed floorboards kept their map of other people's joys rings from soda bottles. Dense wear heels had struck down a beat to hard. I stood in the middle of it all and thought, this is where the first version of me met the last version of him. I could almost see us moving there, awkward, shy, careful, then uncareful when we forgot to be afraid. Robert, I said, because saying his name had begun to feel less like grief and more like opening a door. The air cooled against my skin, like someone had passed by. Then I heard it, a brief tremor of sound, not quite a song and not quite silence. I followed it to the raised stage, where the band had once played. The curtains, faded velvet the color of tired cherries, hung heavy. On the edge of the piano, beneath a thin coat of dust, lay a small square of blue paper, folded twice. My name was on it, his handwriting unmistakable. My fingers shook as I opened it. Evelyn, you said yes to this dance, and you kept saying yes when life asked harder things. I can't carry the music anymore, so I'm leaving you the notes. Lift the back panel of the piano. There's a compartment they used to hide the waltz sheets from the drummer who played too fast. What's inside will take you where the morning waits. I swallowed the ache in my throat and slid my hands under the piano's backbod. The wood was stubborn at first, then yielded with a sigh. Inside, wrapped in a handkerchief I recognized white with a stitched blue W from the Willow Lane concession stand, were three things: a photograph, a locker token, and a key unlike the others. The photograph was of us at this very pavilion, a stranger's flash catching us mid-laugh. My hair a soft catastrophe around my face, his tie still crooked. On the back, in his careful print, he'd written, "For when you forget how we looked at each other." The locker token was stamped with the train station emblem and a number I didn't recognize. The key was thin, nickel, not brass, with a tiny C108 etched into its neck. I sat on the edge of the stage and let the three objects settle my breathing. The nickel key was cold as a coin at the bottom of a fountain. The token felt like time made into metal. The photograph warmed quickly in my hand, as if it had stored sunlight from a younger hour. I could hear the echo of a waltz we never finished. "Morning is wherever you are," the plaque would say one day, but I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that Robert was arranging a choreography for me, step by step, place by place, until I reached a line where love and time leaned toward each other. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned too quickly and laughed at myself when I saw nothing but the slant of light. Still, the laugh sounded like it belonged here, as if the room had been waiting to hold it again. I put the note in my pocket, the photo in my wallet close to where my pulse beat, and the token and the C108 key in my coat. The door rattled, a small knock from the outside. For a heartbeat, fear flickered, then eased. It was only Mrs. Hahn, the pavilion keeper, her face the same as I remembered from neighborhood meetings, kind eyes, stern mouth softened by time. "I saw your car," she said, peering in. "We don't open this place much anymore. You all right in there?" "I'm visiting old music," I managed, "and finding new steps." She tilted her head, understanding more than my words. "He brought me the spare key 3 weeks ago," she said quietly. "Said someone special might need it soon." I didn't ask questions, just made sure the latch wasn't rusty. 3 weeks ago, he had been planning the morning from inside the edges of night. I thanked her, and when she left, she slipped something into my hand without making a ceremony of it, a small, folded receipt from the bench plaque engraver, dated yesterday at 6:27 a.m., the same time the second audio file had appeared. He asked me for the address, she said. Said he wanted to get the wording right. Outside, the light had shifted warmer, the day wearing a late afternoon gold. I stood at the threshold of the pavilion and realized I was holding a map drawn in objects. Bench, envelope, ribbon, letters, pavilion, piano, photograph, token, C108. The pattern made a kind of quiet sense. Robert had never believed that love was something you told once. He believed you showed it, again and again, in ways that could be held in the hand. On the way to the car, I pressed the nickel key into my palm until it found the small tender center there. Train station lockers belonged to the old world doors, but the number C108 sang with a newness that quickened my steps. The station wasn't far. On Sundays, after we walked the lake and danced one almost dance, we'd buy paper cups of too hot coffee and watch the trains write dark lines across the afternoon. As I drove, a low bell tolled from the church on Elm, the chime folding into the quiet the way a lullaby folds into a child's sleep. I parked where I always had, out of habit, and the station felt exactly like itself. Tile floors that remembered 1,000 hurryings, echoes that made ordinary voices sound important, a departure board tapping out other people's plans. A cleaning man pushed a yellow cart past, humming a tune I couldn't place. When I asked about the C row of lockers, he pointed without pausing, as if everyone who walked through here carried a secret they needed to store. There they were, C. A long silver smile of doors, each the right size for a small history. I ran my fingers along the numbers until they landed on 108. My breath stuttered. The key turned, but not all the way. A second lock resisted, almost playful, as if the door were teasing me for being too eager. I tried again, slower, and felt the interior pin give. The locker clicked. I hesitated, palm flat on the cool metal. Behind me, a train stirred, its engine breathing like a sleeping thing that had decided to wake. I thought of the pavilion, of the bench, of our kitchen with its 2 cups and the lipstick mark on my wrist that hadn't washed away yet. I thought of the letters written past his life and the way his voice had bent the morning until it fit around me. I opened the locker. Inside was a small wooden box wrapped in blue ribbon, a USB drive in a plain envelope, and a single white lily still fresh, its fragrance precise and clean, as if it had just been placed there. On top of the ribbon, in his handwriting, a line I knew from the beginning of our marriage and from the end of that impossible morning. Meet me where the sun is gentle. My fingers hovered over the ribbon, and the station clock clicked to the next minute like a metronome reminding me to breathe. Whatever was inside that box would either end the mystery or deepen it beyond answers. I took a breath that felt like a first step, and then, holding the box to my chest as if it could feel my heartbeat, I turned toward the light pooling through the station doors toward whatever the morning still had to give. The lily was impossibly fresh. Its petals curved outward like they were listening. Its scent so sharp and clean that it made my eyes sting. I touched it carefully, half expecting it to crumble into dust. But it didn't. It was real, soft, warm, as if it had just been placed there by a living hand. I set it gently aside and picked up the small wooden box. The blue ribbon around it was tied in the same knot Robert used every Christmas, when he wrapped gifts too perfectly for someone who claimed he hated wrapping paper. I untied it slowly, afraid of what I might find, or what I might not. Inside, folded neatly, was a single sheet of thick paper and a small envelope containing a USB drive. The letter came first. My Evelyn, if you've come this far, then I kept my promise. You always said you didn't believe in miracles, only in the quiet persistence of love. But maybe they're the same thing. Maybe love is just the miracle that refuses to fade. You'll want answers. The truth is, there are two kinds of time. The one the clocks obey, and the one the heart remembers. When I woke up in the hospital that night, I knew the first kind was ending for me. But the second kind, it was still yours and mine. The nurse said I spoke your name before I went quiet again. Maybe I never stopped. Play What's on the Drive when you're ready, not before. Let the morning find you first. I read it 3 times, each slower than the last, tracing his handwriting the way I once traced the lines of his face in half-sleep. The way he wrote to kinds of time made my chest tighten, because deep down, I already knew what he meant. There's the time that ends, and the time that lingers in every smell, every habit, every half-finished sentence you still whisper into the dark. I turned the USB drive over in my hand. It was ordinary, black plastic, the kind you find in any office supply store. But I could almost feel it hum, faintly alive with whatever truth it carried. I didn't want to play it yet. I wasn't ready for the sound of his voice again. Not until I could breathe without trembling. I slipped it into my coat pocket beside the nickel key. Then I picked up the lily. Its stem was wrapped in a thin blue ribbon, matching the others, but tucked beneath it was something else. A train ticket. Departure, 6:40 p.m. Destination, Willow Station. Seat, window, coach 7. Passenger, Evelyn Carter. It was printed for today's date. I froze, staring at it, unable to process the absurdity of it all. Robert had been dead for weeks. The funeral had already happened. Yet here I was, holding a ticket with my name on it, prepared by him. The platform announcement echoed through the station. Train for 102 to Willow Station, departing in 10 minutes. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. I looked around. The station was almost empty, just a few travelers lost in their own little worlds. A businessman typing furiously on his laptop, a young couple laughing quietly, an old woman knitting with her eyes closed. Nobody seemed to notice me. Or maybe they did, but chose not to. I picked up the box, the flower, the USB drive, the letter, everything that had waited in that locker for me, and boarded the train. As the doors closed, a strange calm settled over me. The kind of calm that comes when the decision has already been made by something larger than logic. The train jerked forward with a deep metallic sigh, and the rhythm of the wheels began to hum beneath my feet. I sat by the window, holding the lily against my chest, watching the city give way to fields of gold and shadow. For a long time, I said nothing. I just listened, to the hum of the train, to the faint murmur of passengers, to my own heart refusing to slow down. Halfway through the journey, my phone buzzed. One new voicemail. No number. Just unknown. I hesitated before pressing play. His voice filled the tiny space like light slipping through a crack. Evelyn, if you're on this train, then you've done everything right. You were never meant to stay where grief built its house. The morning doesn't live in the past. It waits for those brave enough to walk toward it. When the train stops, follow the sound of the water. You'll know where to go. I pressed the phone to my chest and closed my eyes. The sound of his voice was no longer the echo of death. It was direction, purpose. When the train slowed, the station sign appeared in the fading daylight. Willow Station. Small, nearly forgotten, with its old brick walls and rusted benches. The same place where, years ago, he'd bought me coffee and told me that ordinary days were just miracles with quieter clothes. The doors opened with a hiss. I stepped down, the lily still in my hand. The air smelled of wet grass and something faintly sweet. Honeysuckle, maybe. Somewhere beyond the trees, I heard it. the sound of running water, the river. I followed it until the station noise disappeared, the rhythm of the train fading into the wind. The sun was setting, and the light brushed everything gold, turning even the smallest stones into tiny suns. The path narrowed, leading to a clearing I didn't remember ever seeing before. And there, between two willows, stood something that stole my breath completely. A wooden archway, freshly built, wrapped in blue ribbon. Hanging from it, a sign that read, "Where the morning is gentle," and beneath it, another box, smaller, sealed, with my name burned into the lid. The archway looked new, the wood still pale where it hadn't seen much weather yet, the blue ribbon pulling the sunlight into narrow, deliberate lines. Someone had measured this moment. Someone had counted how many breaths it would take me to get here. I stood beneath the ribbon and listened to the river, to the trees, to the private silence that happens when the world understands you're about to open something that will change you. The box was warm from the last of the day. My name, Evelyn, was burned into the lid with a careful hand. I slid my fingers along the grooves of each letter, as if touching the edges of who I had been. When I lifted the lid, the scent of cedar rose up the way his cologne used to rise from his winter coats. Inside, a folded letter, a florist receipt, a narrow envelope tied with a thread of the same blue ribbon, and a small brass tag the size of a coin. I unfolded the letter first. "My Evelyn, if you found the arch, then you followed every step I could leave you. There's not much left I can build with my hands, but I can arrange a morning that sits where you can reach it. People say time is strict. You and I know it can be kind. Sometimes the clocks do their job on paper while love does its job in the body. If anyone tells you this is confusion, go to the places that keep the tidy versions of truth. The hospital ledger, the taxi log, the florist's stub. They don't know how to lie. Collect them, and you will see we were not crazy, only careful. The brass tag is for the bench. The envelope is for you when you're ready to sit there without me. But not yet. First, set the morning down in ink where others can read it. Then come back to the river, to the place where water keeps secrets without losing them. I let the paper rest on my lap, my eyes blurring until the trees swam in green and gold. The places that keep the tidy versions of truth. The phrase steadied me. We had been living inside the wild truth, the kind that knots itself in the chest and refuses to be diagrammed. But there was another truth, a bureaucratic kind with stamps and time codes and names in neat boxes. Robert was asking me to gather both, to let them bless each other. The florist receipt lay beneath the letter, dated 6:27 a.m., the exact time the second audio clip had dropped into my phone without asking permission. Order: 1 lily, white, card optional, pickup arranged. My breath snagged. It was identical to the lily that had waited in the locker. He had bought the flower that would later greet me inside a moment the hospital never meant to allow. The brass tag was oval, engraved with 5 simple words. Morning is wherever you are. My thumb found the soft trough the engraving had made. A tag for a bench plaque. I thought of the bench near the willow, of the note he left, of the promise stitched through every step, blue ribbon pulling me forward. I tucked everything back into the box except the thin envelope, the one he'd said was for me. When I was ready, I wasn't. Not yet. Some things you open only once, and I wanted the world to be very quiet when I did. By the time I reached the car, evening had started to collect itself. The first star wrestled a bit of sky away from the sunset. I drove toward town with the USB drive still unopened in my pocket, and the lilies' scent clinging to my coat like a vow. The hospital was kind the way tired places are kind, soft voices, practiced pauses. A clerk with a name badge that read Pearl took one look at me and, without being told, softened further. "I can help you," she said, and it sounded like more than a sentence. "I need to understand a time," I said. "A time that doesn't make sense." Paper unspooled. Screens blinked. Lines of numbers lined up like soldiers learning a gentle song. Admission, 10:58 p.m. Pronouncement, 11:40 p.m. Then a note, almost apologetic in its brevity. Patient became responsive. Requested discharge against medical advice. Returned shortly after. The time stamp on that return was 6:31 a.m. Pearl looked up. We stared at each other for a moment in the shared shock that happens when two separate truths meet, and realized they belong to the same story. "Sometimes," she said softly, "language is clumsy. The form asks for a pronouncement, so it gets one. But people don't always live along a straight line. They get up. They say a name. They change their mind about leaving." "His name was Robert," I said. "He changed his mind twice." Pearl smiled like a careful blessing and printed what I needed. The ledger entries, the note about the discharge and return, the nurse's annotation in the margin. "Patient oriented to person, whispers Evelyn, asks for phone." Outside, the air was cooler. The taxi company was a 3-minute walk down a block that smelled like rain that hadn't happened yet. A man behind the glass had a ledger older than the computer on his desk. He liked the ledger better. Ride, 5:07 a.m. Pickup St. Mary's. Drop, Riverside Park, Willow Bench. Return, 6:19 a.m. He showed me the driver's note. Quiet, polite, smiles when the sun comes up. I pressed my hand to my throat and found my heartbeat steadying inside that simple line. The florist kept paper clipped to a board the way teachers used to keep spelling tests. "1 lily. Paid cash." She tilted her head when she looked at me. The way people tilt their heads when they know a story but don't want to tell it for you. "He knew exactly which one," she said. "Didn't touch anything else. Just the lily." She handed me a copy of the stub and, without asking, wrapped another lily for me to take home. By the time I reached our street, night had finally won the argument with the day. The house glowed the way it always did from the lamplight in the front room. But the glow felt different, less lonely, more like a promise keeping itself. I set the new lily beside the old coffee cup. To white mouths open to the quiet, to mornings breathing in the same room. I spread the evidence across the table the way you spread out map pieces before you tape the countries back together. Hospital ledger, taxi log, florist stub, 6:04 a.m. Voicemail, 6:11 a.m. Hallway video, 6:12 a.m. The kiss, 6:27 a.m. The second audio file, the bench engraver's receipt, 6:31 a.m. Return to the hospital. The clocks had told their truth. My body had told mine. Together they made a story that was not neat but was honest. In the quiet, the words from Robert's letter returned and sat down beside me. To kinds of time. The paper kind had ended in ink and signatures. The heart kind had kept going long enough to make the morning, to deliver a lily, to put a box beneath an archway and a tag in my palm that could name a bench after the way we had always lived. I opened the brass tag again and let it catch the lamplight. I thought of the plaque it would become, of strangers who would sit there and read that line without knowing the way we taught each other to be brave. I thought of the USB drive still in my pocket at small, patient wait and knew I was almost ready to listen. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Not urgent, not uncertain. The kind of knock made by someone who has decided to be kind before they are anything else. Through the glass, I saw a figure familiar but unexpected standing on my porch with a folder tucked against their chest, the edge of a blue ribbon peeking from between the papers. I gathered the ledger copies with a steady hand, put the lily where the light could reach it, and went to open the door. Whatever was waiting there would belong to both kinds of time. The knock came again, gentle, patient, almost rhythmic, as if whoever was standing outside knew my heartbeat and had decided to match it. I hesitated, fingers resting on the doorknob, my breath caught halfway between fear and recognition. Through the frosted glass, I could see only the outline of a person, tall, still, the soft curve of shoulders wrapped in a light coat. For one impossible second, I thought it might be him. My mind played the cruelest trick it could. It let me imagine Robert standing there, holding his hat, smiling the way he always did when he forgot his keys. My heart reacted before my logic could interfere. I opened the door. The figure wasn't Robert. It was a young man, maybe in his late 20s, with kind eyes and a tired face. He carried a thin folder under his arm, tied with, of course, a thin blue ribbon. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked softly. "Yes," I managed. "Do I know you?" He hesitated, then smiled, the kind of smile that tries to reassure without overstepping. "Not personally. My name is Samuel. I work with the historical archives at Willow Station. I believe this belongs to you." He extended the folder. Inside was a stack of printed photographs, stills from an old surveillance camera. Time stamped October 12th, 6:31 a.m. My breath stopped. Each photo showed the same thing. Robert, standing at the entrance of the hospital, holding a single white lily and looking directly into the lens. His expression wasn't one of confusion or pain. It was calm, even deliberate, as if he knew he was being seen. "He asked me to deliver these," Samuel said quietly. "I didn't understand at the time. He came to the station 2 weeks ago with a USB drive in an envelope. Told me that when a woman named Evelyn Carter came asking about locker C108, I should give her this." My knees nearly gave out. You spoke to him?" He nodded. He seemed weak, but focused. He said something that didn't make sense to me, that he needed to make sure the morning arrived on time. I thought he was talking about the train schedule. The words fell into me like stones into deep water. The morning arrived on time. Did he say anything else? I asked. Samuel hesitated, his eyes softening with that particular sadness people get when they've witnessed something they can't explain. Only this: tell her I didn't leave. I just changed direction. Something inside me cracked, but not in pain. More like a door opening in a long locked room. I thanked him, but as I reached for the photos again, something slipped from between the pages. A small, sealed envelope with my name written in the same steady hand I'd come to recognize across every step of this impossible journey. "Is that for you?" Samuel asked. I nodded. "Yes, and I think I'm finally ready to open it." He smiled once more, nodded politely, and turned to leave. "He wanted you to know," he said before stepping off the porch, "that not everything that ends is gone." When I closed the door, the house felt alive again. Not haunted, not lonely, but awake. The light from the lamp flickered once, as if the air had taken a deep breath. I sat at the kitchen table, the USB drive still untouched beside the lily, and placed the small envelope next to it. My name looked different this time, lighter, almost hurried, like he had written it from the other side of something thin and fleeting. I broke the seal carefully. Inside was a folded note and a small SD card. The note read, "Evelyn, you followed every light I left for you. What's next isn't for your eyes alone. It's for your heart. Plug the drive into the old radio console in the living room. It was built to play more than music. And when you do, don't be afraid if you hear my voice in the walls. The house remembers both of us. The house remembers. The same words I had whispered days ago, when I'd found the feather by the fireplace. I stood, the air trembling round me as if the walls themselves were listening. My hands shook as I slid the USB drive into the old radio console. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a low hum filled the room, soft, electric, almost like a breath being drawn. Then I heard it. His voice. Not from the radio, not from the speakers, from everywhere. Evelyn. It wasn't a recording. It was too alive, too precise. The sound came from inside the walls, from the corners where light doesn't reach. I told you, love doesn't fade. It changes its form. My knees went weak. Robert, I'm here, the voice said, calm, steady, threaded with the same warmth that had kissed my forehead that impossible morning. You followed the notes, and now the song can end where it began. The lights flickered once, twice. The lily on the table bent slightly toward the sound. The house exhaled. Tomorrow, the voice whispered, you'll see the morning for what it truly is. The hum faded, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. A silence that held shape. I stood there long after the voice was gone, the faint scent of cedar and lilies still clinging to the air. And then I realized. The second envelope, the one marked when you're ready, was still unopened on the counter. I picked it up. My fingers trembled. Tomorrow, he had said, whatever waited in that envelope was waiting for the sunrise. I didn't sleep so much as drift between breaths. The way a boat holds to its mooring while the tide keeps its secret work. Every time I closed my eyes, the house sighed a gentle settling, like pages turning themselves. Once, I swore I felt the weight of a hand smoothing the blanket at my shoulder. When the darkness finally softened into gray, I was already awake, watching the first thread of light stitch itself along the edge of the curtains. The envelope lay on the kitchen table where I'd left it, the blue ribbon catching the smallest angle of dawn. For the morning, he'd written my name underneath, a little rushed, as if the pen had outrun his breath. I made coffee without tasting it, set a cup beside the lily, and carried the envelope to the window where the light was honest. I slid a butter knife under the seal. Paper gives way like a held breath. Inside were three things: a letter, a thin sheet of tracing paper with a sketched engraving, and a small silver screw taped to the corner like a star someone refused to lose. I read the letter first. My Evelyn, morning is not a time. It's a kindness. I wanted the last thing I gave you to be something you could touch when the clocks were cruel. If you're reading this at dawn, then I'm exactly where I promised to be between the minute you remember and the minute you're living now. Take the brass tag. Take the screw. Bring the lily if it hasn't faded. Go to the bench beneath the willow. Set the plaque. Sit where we always sat. And then, if you can bear it, play the video on the drive. I wanted you to hear me in the house first, because houses are braver than fields. But by the water, the world listens better. If the air seems to answer you, don't be afraid. It's only love doing what love does when it's done with being quiet. My hands shook, not with fear, but with the peculiar relief of being given simple, human steps. Carry, fasten, sit, press play. Even miracles are kinder when they begin with work the hands recognize. The tracing paper showed the plaque as it should appear once mounted. The same line as the brass tag, but with one more sentence beneath, smaller, tucked where only the patient would find it. Morning is wherever you are, and where you wait, I arrive. I pressed my thumb over the second line until the graphite blurred, as if I could smudge time itself. Then I gathered what the letter asked of me: brass tag, silver screw, Lily, USB drive. I slipped the little screwdriver from the junk drawer into my coat pocket. The one Robert teased me about your entire hardware store, he used to say. The house watched me put on my scarf. The clock, for once, didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a witness. Outside, the street wore the clean hush of early morning, the kind of quiet that makes even birds careful. Frost traced delicate white ferns along the edges of fallen leaves. The air was cold enough to sting and pure enough to forgive. I carried the lily like a candle. The path to the lake felt shorter than yesterday, as if knowing exactly where to go takes a mile out of every mile. The willow bowed over the water like an old friend leaning in to hear the good part of the story. The bench, dark with dew, waited in its place. I set the lily on the seat and pressed the brass tag into the little oval depression the woodworker had carved a space already, expecting what I'd brought. The silver screw caught the morning light. The screwdriver turned with the meek satisfaction of a job that knows it matters. When the last quarter turned seated, something in me seated too. The plaque shone a little, then settled into the grain. Morning is wherever you are. The words didn't feel like an epitaph. They felt like a door that's always been unlocked. I sat. The wood was cold through my coat. The river made its low, constant music. Somewhere, a church bell counted a number I forgot as soon as it reached me. I took the USB drive from my pocket, closed my eyes, and exhaled the kind of breath you only let go when you've decided to stop arguing with what's true. My phone recognized the drive with a small, domestic chime. Video_1, MP4. Date stamp. Today, 5:58 a.m. I pressed play. The screen opened on the bench itself. This bench, in this light only a shade earlier, when the sky was still the color of an unmade promise. Robert sat where I sat now, his coat buttoned wrong by one button, his head held in his lap like he'd taken it off to be more polite with the morning. He looked tired, but not troubled. The tiredness of someone who has set everything where it belongs. "Good morning, my love," he said. His voice made the phone smaller and the world larger. "If you're watching, then we've done it. We have our morning where we can both reach it." He turned the camera a little, and for a second the video caught his hand. The crescent white scar along his thumb from the summer he'd decided to fix the porch swing alone. Proof of a life that had known ordinary risks and chosen ordinary joys anyway. "I learned," he went on softly, "that there's a kind of border the body tries to keep. But love doesn't mind borders. It visits. It leaves a cup warm. It asks a stranger to hold a folder for a while. It writes a line for a plaque and trusts you to find the right screw." He smiled the small, sideways smile that only ever belonged to me. "When they told me midnight had my name, I asked for morning. Not for the day to come back. Days are greedy, but for a moment we'd recognize. They obliged me, Evelyn. Or maybe you did." A breeze moved the willow behind him in the exact rhythm that was moving it behind me now. The present and the past wore the same coat for a moment and didn't complain about the fit. "If the house spoke last night," he said, head tilted as if listening to my memory, "I'm glad. Houses remember better than churches do. They keep the shape of our laughter in the corners." He looked down then, and when he looked back up, his eyes shone with that specific brightness a person gets when they've put the heavy thing down. "I won't ask you not to be sad. Sadness is just the way love keeps staring at what it can't stop loving. I only ask you to let it be morning wherever you go. If you sit, sit in light. If you wait, wait on purpose." He reached forward toward the camera, toward me, and the frame filled with his open palm. For a heartbeat, the video and the air round me shared a temperature. "I'll be late," he whispered. "But I won't be gone." The image trembled, not like failing machinery, like a held breath being released. In the background, that faint hospital beep surfaced and faded, as if a line between rooms had been briefly crossed and then respected. The screen went black. I didn't cry at first. I watched the black screen hold its ground, as if it had decided to be the gentlest possible version of silence. Then a tear found the corner of my mouth and tasted like iron and clean rain. I touched the plaque with my fingertips. The metal was cold, then less cold. The lily breathed its straight, transparent sweetness into the space under the willow. And somewhere a bird reconsidered its mourning and sang only one soft note, as if agreeing. "I hear you," I said aloud, "because sometimes you have to teach your own voice what it's for. If I wait, I'll wait on purpose." I closed the video and tucked the phone away. The bench received my weight the way it always had, without judgment, without agenda. I sat there until light climbed higher and color returned to the leaves. I sat until the line between then and now stopped arguing and started holding hands. When I finally stood, the river seemed to move a little closer, like a friend coming to walk the first part of the path with me. I pressed my palm to the plaque one last time and turned toward home, with the kind of quiet certainty that has nothing to prove. On the footpath, I felt it light, unmistakable, a kiss against my temple, and the faintest warmth of cedar in the air. Morning arrived, and with it, the words I needed to say to everyone who would listen. When I came back home, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt quiet in the way a church feels after a hymn, still vibrating with something larger than sound. The coffee cup was still where I'd left it, the feather still by the fireplace, the faint trace of cedar still breathing through the hallway. For the first time in weeks, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it hold me. I placed the lily in a small glass vase beside the window. The morning light touched its petals the same way his hand used to touch mine, carefully, like it was afraid to bruise the moment. Outside, the world had decided to start again. A mailman whistled. A child on a bicycle laughed so hard she scared the pigeons from the wire. The ordinary had returned, but it had learned new manners. I took out the last letter, the one I'd carried folded in my coat pocket all night. The ink had smudged in one corner, maybe from my fingers, maybe from his when he'd written it. It read, "Morning, my Evelyn, isn't about what rises, it's about what stays. The sun only lends its light to remind you that love already glows on its own. Don't come looking for me at the river or in the house. I'll be wherever you pause long enough to be kind to yourself, to someone else, to the world. That's where we'll meet, every time. R." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the front pocket of the blue cardigan he'd always said made me look like a season that forgot to end. It fit there as if it had always been waiting. That morning, I brewed 2 cups of tea instead of one. Habit, maybe. Hope, certainly. I set his cup across from mine and whispered, "You were right, you know. There really are 2 kinds of time. And somehow, we get to live both." The light through the kitchen window shifted, bright enough that it caught the brass tag on the table. The words shimmered, "Morning is wherever you are." It wasn't a memorial anymore. It was a map. I thought about everything Robert had built for me. The messages, the keys, the boxes, the ribbon, the bench. But more than that, he'd built a way back to myself. A reminder that love doesn't ask to be understood, it asks to be remembered gently. I walked to the door and opened it wide, letting the air move freely through the rooms. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder to see if he was there. I already knew he was. In the sound of the kettle, in the tick of the clock, in the morning that arrived exactly on time. And then, to all of you listening, yes, you, sitting wherever you are right now, I want to say this. If you've ever loved someone so much, that time itself seemed too small for it, know that love doesn't end where clocks stop. It keeps its own rhythm. It finds its way back in sunlight, in letters, in the smell of coffee, or the shape of a feather on the floor. If this story found you, maybe it was supposed to. Maybe you were meant to hear that it's okay to believe in the gentle kind of miracles. The ones that don't shout. The ones that wait patiently for you to notice. If you believe that love survives time itself, give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to Whispers of Mama Ruth. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me keep sharing these stories. And it reminds me that somewhere out there, morning is still arriving for someone new. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, may your mornings be kind and your memories gentle.